to Troy University's training session for the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, updates for 2016. This session will provide information on how we will implement the new law and how this will affect both employees and supervisors. In the future, there may be changes associated with implementation, and we appreciate your patience and your cooperation as we navigate this transition. Thank you for attending, and as always, if you have any questions, please contact the Human Resources Department. We'll start this training off by covering a few of the terms you will hear mentioned throughout the session. Exempt employees are not authorized to be paid overtime pay, regardless of the hours worked. Non-exempt employees must be paid 1.5 times their hourly rate of pay for all hours worked over 40 in a designated work week. FLSA is the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it's a federal law. This law mandates that employees meeting certain criteria must be eligible to receive overtime payment for any hours worked over 40 in their work week. Comp time is compensating employees for overtime worked by giving them 1.5 hours credit for any hours worked over 40 in a designated work week, to be used at a later date. Flex hours are hours in a work week adjusted to avoid working overtime. For example, a supervisor can ask an employee to work 2 hours extra one day and allow them to work 2 hours less on another day in the same work week. With flex time, the hours should still equal 40 at the end of the week, or else employees must be paid for overtime. Let's go over some of the key implications of the new FLSA ruling and how it will affect impacted employees. We are implementing changes to previously exempt employees beginning December 1st, 2016. Some employees previously considered exempt will be reclassified as non-exempt based on criteria provided by the Department of Labor. This transition is not a negative reflection of an employee's position, but serves as a way to benefit employees by ensuring they are appropriately compensated for overtime. Don't be disheartened by the transition from exempt to non-exempt. This status does not define your skills or your value to the university. The FLSA law was designed to adjust the salary threshold for determining overtime pay, which is over 40 hours per week. Previously, the threshold was $23,660 per year. The threshold has been increased to $47,476 per year. This means that employees earning less than $47,476 should be considered non-exempt, which means they are not exempt from receiving overtime pay. There are exceptions to this rule which relate to the type of position held. If you are already considered a non-exempt or hourly paid employee, this change will not affect you. Employees not impacted by the new law are teachers, coaches, and certain academic administrative personnel who make as much as entry-level teachers, which is $42,000. Here's how we'll implement these changes. Overtime will be used by Troy only when absolutely necessary and approved by proper authority level. The need for overtime must be a critical business need. Overtime pay will be 1.5 times the hourly rate for all hours over 40 in a work week. Employees will not be allowed to work comp time. However, flex time will be permitted as long as it equals 40 hours in the work week and is approved by the supervisor. Student and part-time workers will not be impacted. Impacted employees will still get their same annual leave and sick hours, still earn the same rate of pay, still be paid monthly, will enter hours for tracking purposes only, and all employees, regardless if they are working overtime, must submit weekly timesheets. Let's talk about time approval. Supervisors will have to approve hours for these monthly paid exempt employees. Overtime forms must be submitted and approved prior to any employee being permitted to work overtime. We understand that there are emergency situations where employees will have to come into work unexpectedly or stay later, but as a general rule, the vast majority of overtime should be approved beforehand. Minimizing overtime. As we discussed earlier, overtime should only be used when absolutely necessary. Supervisors will be expected to make reasonable alternative decisions if possible to avoid overtime. Responsibility to minimize overtime is that of both the employee and the supervisor. Critical mission needs are the driving factor. Let's discuss working from home, traveling, and other factors associated with determining what is considered working hours. On call at work is work time, but at home it is non-work time unless the employee actually does work. Being called back to work after going home is work time, but not the travel time from home to work and back. If work is required to be performed, those hours are considered working hours. If work benefits the university, those hours are considered work hours, but if the work serves to benefit the employee, it would not be considered work hours. Let's cover a few other facts about what is considered work time. Travel time. Travel time to and from work is not considered work time. If the employee is called back to work after having left the workplace, it is considered work time. Time spent traveling as part of principal activity during normal workday is considered work. Travel that keeps an employee overnight is considered work if it is approved by the university as work travel. Travel time aboard a plane, train, bus, or personal vehicle does not count as work time unless the employee is the driver and approved to drive their personal vehicle. Any travel time that cuts across the normal working hours of the employee will be counted as working hours, even when it is on a non-working day, such as a weekend or holiday. For example, if an employee normally works Monday to Friday from 8 to 5 and is traveling during those hours on Saturday or Sunday, those hours would be considered work hours. If the same is true for time doing work at the travel location, such as a seminar, workshop, presentation, etc. Any work that the employee is required to perform is considered work hours. Social and sleep time would not be considered working hours. Travel time outside normally scheduled work hours as a passenger on an airplane, train, bus, boat, or automobile will not count as work hours. For example, if you're riding in a car to an event that is part of your job, you as the passenger cannot consider those working hours, but the driver of the vehicle can consider those as working hours. In another example, if you have a work trip and you have to be there for an event on Saturday, but you fly out on Thursday, you cannot consider any of the time spent Thursday or Friday working hours. Only the event on Saturday and any hour spent in work-related activities can be considered working hours. Meal times, social time, sleep time, and normal driving time to and from work on a normal workday must be deducted from travel hours. If you have any further questions about what constitutes work time, just ask HR. Let's talk about a few other factors. Working 12 hours in one day is not overtime unless the employee works more than 40 hours in a work week. Working on holidays does not justify additional pay unless the employee works more than 40 hours in a work week. Working on an administrative day does not get the employee additional pay since they have not worked more than 40 hours in the work week and they're getting paid for the entire week anyways. Recording work hours. Employees will enter their work hours weekly on the monthly employee timesheet found on the Troy HR website under Forms. It's an EchoSign form that will be electronically sent for approval. This form will be completed regardless if you worked overtime hours or not. Once the employee presses submit, the form goes to the employee's supervisor for approval and then it will be filed for record keeping. If the supervisor disapproves the hours, the employee is notified, kind of like sick leave, that hours are not entered correctly and to resubmit the form. Employees and supervisors should save a copy of their timesheets in the event overtime pay is required or if we're audited by the Department of Labor. Requesting overtime approval. When employees are asked to work more than 40 hours in a work week, which is Sunday through Saturday, an overtime approval request form must be completed for that week and approved prior to working the overtime. The form must be approved by the supervisor and associate vice chancellor or equivalent or senior vice chancellor. Employees must obtain approval for overtime before working over 40 hours in a week. The overtime approval request form should be filed by the employee and one copy should be sent to the supervisor and one copy sent to Human Resources. This form will be used to request payment for overtime pay. Requesting overtime payment. Employees will submit the following forms as a package if they worked more than 40 hours in any work week. A copy of their timesheet where more than 40 hours are to be paid as regular pay or as overtime pay. The overtime approval request form for that week. and the monthly employee supplemental pay form for the total extra hours worked for that week. Documents you'll need in order to get paid for overtime are the monthly employee timesheet, the overtime approval request form, and the monthly employee supplemental pay form. Let's talk a little bit about the workflow for working overtime in a step-by-step process. Step 1, you've reached your 40 hours of work for the week and determined that you still have other critical responsibilities to perform before the end of the week. Step 2, you must seek supervisor approval for working overtime and use the overtime request form. Step 3, on your weekly timesheet that week, report all hours worked, including the overtime. Step 4, complete the monthly employee supplemental pay form where you will calculate the overtime payment you are owed. You will need to know your hourly rate of pay for this. Your hourly rate can be found on your pay advices in Trojan Web Express or by calling HR. Step 5, submit your overtime package with appropriate signatures to HR to process your payment. So, what if you are a full-time employee, but you also work a secondary part-time position within the university? If an employee works 40 hours per week in their primary full-time capacity, the rate of pay for their second position should be their full-time salary multiplied by 1.5. For example, if an employee earns $10 an hour in their full-time role, their part-time salary would be $15 per hour. Please visit the Human Resources website to view the FLSA implementation guide for instructions on how to calculate overtime payment for employees who have full-time jobs with the university and also teach in an adjunct capacity, because that gets a little bit tricky. Lots of employees will have questions about this process. Let's go over a few of the frequently asked questions. Can you change an employee's work schedule? For example, right now it's Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Can we change their normal schedule to Tuesday to Saturday from 9 to 6? The answer is yes. If you need to adjust an employee's work schedule for the needs of the business, you can change their working hours in order to avoid paying overtime. What if you were scheduled for overtime and the task you're performing goes over what you thought it would? What should you do? We understand that sometimes situations are out of our control, and for the benefit of the university, we need to work longer than we thought. In these situations, send a quick email, text, or call your supervisor and get approval if you can, then follow up with the appropriate documentation after the fact. Will we be individually notified, or can we call and ask if we are non-exempt? Yes, we'll notify any employees who will remain exempt, and you can always call and ask HR. When do we start recording and submitting our time? Your first timesheet will be due at the end of the week, the first week of December. Where do I find the weekly timesheet, overtime approval form, and monthly employee supplemental pay form? All these forms are located on the Troy website. What about employees who have second positions? How is overtime calculated? Like we said before, for any hours worked over 40 in a work week, the employee will receive 1.5 times their hourly rate for all work performed in any other position. This is a major transition for employees, supervisors, human resources, payroll, IT. There could be future changes to this, but we'll make sure to send out appropriate communication to let you know. Thank you for working with us while we implement these new processes that keep us compliant to federal law. We're here to answer any questions or discuss any concerns you may have. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're here to serve you. This concludes the training session for implementation of the 2016 FLSA overtime ruling. Thank you for attending.